Welcome back to Virginia this morning. Mark your calendars and join Junior League of Richmond this Thursday as they host their virtual annual book and author event. Jessica recently spoke with one of this year's featured authors. Here is that conversation.
Junior League of Richmond proudly presents the 75th annual book and author event this Friday, May 7th, and you're cordially invited. Tickets are still available. The event has gone virtual, but one thing that we know, the authors participating are very excited to spend time with everybody in attendance. We're talking today with Grady Hendrix. He's the author of the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and what a read. Grady, it's great to see you.
No, thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. And I read this one cover to cover. And I have to tell you, yeah, it gave me a little bit of, I might have pulled the covers up a little tighter at night.
Well, I feel like that's sort of okay. A lot of people I've talked to, I was worried about having a horror novel come out right now. And I think being able to escape it to something that's scary, but it's a vampire and not something a little more real. I mean, I think most people are agreed that vampires don't exist. I think it's a nice release for people right now.
I would agree. I definitely felt like it was such a terrific escape. And you and I were talking before we got started with our conversation now about how books are offering that right now as we're spending more time inside with our, self-isolating and kind of away from each other in a group. It's a nice way to escape. And this one offers a great adventure.
No, thanks. Well, it's funny right now. I feel like a lot of folks are, they're watching movies, they're watching Netflix, they're doing all that, which is, great. They're having, their weekly Zoom call with the family, but there's something books give you that you get to shut out the world and kind of go inside yourself. And it's really restorative. I'm finding it really refreshing right now. I'm reading more than I ever have.
Well, let's go inside the pages to a Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This one is a little bit of a sequel, at least in terms of location.
Yeah, I wrote a book a few years ago called My Best Friend's Exorcism, which is about two 10th graders, girls in 1988 who become convinced that one of them's possessed by Satan, and poor decision making ensues. But it's set in Charleston, South Carolina, where I grew up, largely because I have to write about a place I know really, really well, and I know Charleston. And a lot of people thought that the parents in that book were just terrible, terrible people. And I kept thinking, well, no, they're people doing the best they can in unusual circumstances. So I wanted to make good and write about parents. And so Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires set in Charleston just a few years later. And although it's not any of the same characters, whereas that book was about female friendship in high school, this book's about being friends with adults, which is sort of a more complicated thing.
Well, it really does resonate. And it is, for those of us in book clubs, know the strength of the friendships in those book clubs who have been together for years and years and years. So that's an interesting theme to explore. And then, of course, you bring in the fantasy of the whole vampire thing, and it really amps it
Right.
up to a whole other level.
Well, it's funny. My mom's book club, I mean, bless their hearts. I think this is their 40th anniversary this year. So they're almost as old as I am. And I remember being a kid and just hating them. They came in the house, they were noisy. It was a bunch of moms. They drank a lot of wine. They always had cake I wasn't allowed to eat. And I just thought they were lightweights. And as I got older and got to know a lot of them as human beings, not just so-and-so's mom or Ms. Flowers who drives carpool, I realized that their lives were as complicated as anyone's, and they dealt with things that, were some of which were really, really hard. And so I wanted to take readers on sort of a book that reproduced that journey, going from dismissing these women to really seeing them as kind of these unsung heroes who did a lot of things to not only keep their families safe, but to keep it hidden. One of the things you do as a parent is you take the hits so your kids don't. And, I think knowing your parents when you're an adult, you have a very different view of your childhood than as a kid when just everything's unfair all the time.
Yeah, you really learned that they worked very hard, either in a career or leading the household or as a community member. But it sounds like they played hard, at least from that perspective that you had as a
Right.
child.
Right. And, one reason I keep setting these books in Charleston back in the 80s and 90s when I grew up is as much as it can be absurd, it's also somewhere I find tremendously comfortable. I know it. I remember it. And there's things that used to exist. And I think we all feel this way about our communities and neighborhoods that don't anymore. And we miss them. Some of that sense of connection, some of that sense of being involved with your neighbors' lives.
Well, Grady, you bring us to a good point. We have about a minute and a half left. We're going to see you virtually, right? This event has really reinvented itself. The 75th annual book and author event from the Junior League of Richmond, the longest running one across the country. Really cool to be part of it, but now it'll happen virtually. So talk about that as an author in connecting with readers in a much different way.
Yeah, one thing this pandemic has done is everyone's had to adjust to a lot of changes really, really quickly. And I've been amazed to see it happen. And I've also been amazed at how much people are embracing these communal, like virtual events online. I was really worried when my book tour went from a real one to a virtual one. Attendance has been great. And I also think people sometimes worry about author events. Like if you get really bored in the middle, you got to sort of do an excuse me, pardon me, and everyone stares at you. And this way, you get bored, you just log off. And one of the most amazing things to me has been seeing all these independent bookstores around the country just really turn on a dime, from being a brick and mortar business to a mail order to a curbside pickup order business to a virtual event business. And, those are places that really need our support right now. I love Amazon. I've got something coming from them this afternoon, but they're going to be around next year. I feel like this has been a time when we really need to rally around our local bookstores. Even though the books may cost a couple of bucks more, I always feel like that's the tax we pay to have our neighbors.
That's right. I've heard that often. Make sure that you're investing in those businesses like an independent bookstore that you want to be around tomorrow when we do go back to maybe a new sense of normalcy. I do have one last question for you. You're in New
Sure.
York City. Things are very different, certainly. As an author, is this experience starting to inspire you or shape potential narratives you might explore down the line, or have you processed any of it yet?
It's hard to process, but I will say, one of the things is I can't write an unhappy ending, even though I write horror. I feel like if you have an unhappy or a bleak ending, you just haven't thought it out thoroughly. And in the midst of New York City, where the streets are dead and the stores are shuttered, and we have friends in the hospital and getting sick, every day at 7 o'clock, every single person opens their window and they applaud for the healthcare workers. And it's an amazing thing to see the city come together. We're resting. We're not beaten. We'll get better and we'll be back.
Well, we're glad to see you right now and very glad to see a Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires out and available. Looking forward to hearing from you at the end of the week for the Junior League of Richmond's 75th annual book and author event. Grady, thanks for making time and talking with us.
Thanks so much for having me, and I'll virtually see you then.
See you then. It's going to be a great event, the longest standing one in the country. Be sure that you're checking it out.
I love to sign off there. Virtually see you then. Grady Hendrix is one of the featured authors taking part in the Junior League of Richmond's annual book and author event. This virtual event is coming up on this Thursday, May 7th at 7 p.m. through Crowdcast. Tickets are $20 and can be purchased at bookandauthorevent.org. For more information on the great work Junior League of Richmond does throughout the year, you can visit jlrichmond.org. And please stay with us. We will be virtually right back.